The High Court of Justice in Israel has started hearing petitions demanding that it cancel a cabinet resolution which enabled the state to avoid drafting ultra-Orthodox Yeshiva students into the Israeli army. That law permitted this arrangement. It expired last year. So in June of 2023, much before this current war, the government passed a resolution giving itself time until the end of March 2024 to pass a new legislation. This new legislation has to comply with the court's 2017 order that there cannot be any blanket exemptions from compulsory military service. This ruling of the Supreme Court of Israel more than 6 years ago had cancelled blanket exemptions for Haredi Yeshiva students who are ultra-Orthodox Jews studying to be rabbis. The court had cited the earlier law as being discriminatory and therefore struck it down as illegal. The movement for quality government in Israel, which has campaigned for decades now for young Haredi men to be drafted into the army, filed petitions in court in July last year, arguing that the government violated the rule of law. One of the problems in the new law, which the petitioners have cited as particularly problematic, is this: that the defense minister, who is the official who grants blanket exemptions, cannot and should not be allowed to exercise this power without legislative oversight, meaning that the parliament has to approve these exemptions and it cannot be done just at the behest of the executive. The petitioners also make a basic contention in their argument that the exemption for young men who are studying to be rabbis does severe damage to the principle of equality before law, which in itself violates the court's 2017 ruling. The government told the court last week that because of the outbreak of the current war against Hamas on the 7th of October, it has not had the time to formulate and pass a new law in the Knesset, which is the parliament. The government proposed that it will update the court before the end of March about an emerging new proposal and then receive another extension till the end of June to get this new law passed. So in the coming weeks, the government and the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, will have to discuss two military conscription laws at the same time. One of those laws is about extending the service of soldiers who are in compulsory duty and reservists in order to provide the IDF with enough soldiers during the current war and perhaps even for post-war operations. The second law is the more contentious one, which would allow the defense minister to continue what is called the work of Torah, under which 66,000 ultra-Orthodox men who have registered themselves as Yeshiva students would be exempt from military service. 3 times in the past, the High Court of Justice ruled that this arrangement is illegal, it contravenes the principle of equality, and returned the issue back to Parliament. In the state's response to this week's petitions, the Attorney General of Israel wrote on behalf of the state that if the draft law is not advanced by the 1st of April, there is no impediment to drafting ultra-Orthodox men into the army. The High Court's position in principle is one of the main motives behind the ultra-Orthodox parties supporting a controversial move by the Netanyahu government to make the judiciary subservient to the government. That move, if it came to pass, would have made the Supreme Court of Israel rather toothless. In Israel, the ultra-Orthodox claim the right to study in seminaries instead of serving in uniform for the standard 3 years. Some say their pious lifestyles would clash with military duties, while others voice an ideological opposition to the liberal state. The ultra-Orthodox make up of about 13% of Israel's population, but that is a figure that is expected to reach as much as 20% by 2035 because of higher birth rates amongst the ultra-Orthodox. Now, economists argue that the draft exemption keeps some of them unnecessarily in seminaries instead of being drafted and serving on the front lines. But this does not go down well with many fellow Israelis, all of whom have to be compulsorily drafted for military service. So this week, hundreds of flag-waving Israelis protested outside the Supreme Court, which is currently hearing the matter. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government depends almost inordinately on the support of ultra-Orthodox parties who are tooth and nail opposed to this new law. Equal burden is not just a new law, but it's also a needed security imperative for a country that is grappling with the 4-month war with Hamas. And that war, there doesn't seem to be any end in the foreseeable future. It is also that the IDF is now fighting on multiple fronts. It's got Hezbollah on the northern border. It's fighting with the Houthis on the sea lanes of the Red Sea. Changing the current situation is necessary to fix Israeli security. In these times, when Israel has been fighting a war on multiple fronts for multiple months now, suffering heavy losses, the inequality in the defense burden cannot be overlooked. Many Israelis cannot accept that reinforcing the army will rely on extending mandatory service and calling up reservists for longer periods, while at the same time continuing to exempt young ultra-Orthodox men. For many of them, there is an inherent contradiction between the two. As usual, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's dependence on his ultra-Orthodox coalition partners prevents him from ditching the rabbis and doing the common sense security thing. This means that the defense burden will continue to fall on the shoulders of the country's other communities for the foreseeable future. The same communities will continue to pay with their lives, their bodies, blood, and family cohesiveness, while the ultra-Orthodox community will continue to evade service. Netanyahu will soon try some kind of a complicated, ambiguous formula that will allow this injustice to continue even while ensuring his survival in power. For weeks now, ordinary Israelis have been railing against ministers belonging to the ultra-Orthodox United Torah Judaism Party and the National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who has not accepted compulsory defense service in the IDF because of his far-right activism back in his youth days. But after October 7th, many say that the ultra-Orthodox cannot be permitted not to do mandatory military service. Any draft law that does not include the ultra-Orthodox will face parliamentary opposition, including on the part of the coalition, even at the price of bringing down the government. Ever since the current war broke out on the 7th of October, the IDF has called up a total of 300,000 reservists, making it the largest ever call-up of reservists in Israel's history. Many of them have already been released from duty, but there are wide expectations that some of these people will be called back up as the fighting persists in Gaza. Military officials have touted an increase in the ultra-Orthodox who are volunteering for duty in the aftermath of the October 7th massacre. But those numbers are still relatively small, and there's not been a major shift in most ultra-Orthodox leaders and their approach to rejecting military service. Decode, which is the ruling party of Prime Minister Netanyahu, has called on Israelis to draft a new social contract in which more sectors of the public put their shoulder to the wheel when it comes to military service. The IDF's new plan makes it clear that the burden of security falls on the shoulders of a small percentage of people, and that is an unfair system both politically and legally, and that it needs to change. But whether or not Mr. Netanyahu, ever so dependent on his far-right coalition partners to continue to stay on in power, will read the tea leaves and bite the bullet on this one, including ultra-Orthodox men for compulsory military service, it's a question of his political survival versus the most prudent, common sense thing to do.